In 1900, Greek sponge divers spotted something at the bottom of the sea that no human being had seen for 2,000 years. On the ocean floor, among rusted anchors and marble statues covered in coral, there was an object that should not have existed. A corroded lump of bronze, the size of a shoebox, with visible gears inside. Nobody knew what it was. And so it sat forgotten in a museum storage box for 50 years. When scientists finally looked closely, they realized that object was a machine, a calculating machine, built 2,000 years ago. It calculated the movements of the sun, the moon, and the 5 planets with precision that Europe would not achieve again until the 14th century. What you are about to discover will permanently change the way you see human intelligence and the nature of time. It all begins in October 1900, when a captain named Dimitrios Kondos ordered dives in the waters off the island of Antikythera. His divers went down expecting sponges, and instead found an entire shipwreck 2,000 years old. Bronze and marble statues, jewelry, coins, and hundreds of Hellenistic objects were there, perfectly preserved by the ocean floor. And among all those treasures, a shapeless block of bronze that nobody could identify. In 1902, archaeologist Valerio Stais examined the fragments and saw something that stopped him cold. Gears, fitted together with millimetric precision, inside an artifact 2,000 years old. The scientific community rejected the discovery. They called it a fraud, a mistake, an impossibility. After all, gears that precise were considered impossible for the ancient world. That was what everyone believed, but science does not accept impossibilities for long. It accepts evidence, and the evidence was undeniable. In 1951, British historian Derek de Solla Price decided to dedicate his entire life to solving that mystery. He spent 20 years photographing every fragment, measuring every gear, drawing every detail, and in 1974, after 2 decades of work, he published his conclusion. It was an analog computer, an astronomical instrument capable of calculating eclipses, tracking planets, and predicting the calendar with precision down to the minute. No European civilization would build anything remotely similar for over 1,000 years after that shipwreck. To understand the machine, we need to understand the extraordinary world that made it possible. The 2nd century BC was the golden age of Greek science. Mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy walked together as a single discipline. Eratosthenes had calculated the circumference of the Earth with less than 2% error, without satellites, without computers. Archimedes had invented war machines, hydraulic screws, and mechanisms that defied the physics of his time. It was a world where thinking about the cosmos was a funded, respected activity considered essential to civilization. And it was in that environment that someone, we still do not know who, created something the world would forget for 2 full millennia. The mechanism has 37 identified gears, each with a specific number of teeth corresponding to a real astronomical cycle. The main gear has 223 teeth, the exact number of lunations in the Saros cycle, used to predict eclipses with precision. That is not coincidence. That is centuries of astronomical knowledge translated into metal with absolute perfection. On the front face, a pointer indicated the position of the sun in the zodiac throughout the year with daily precision. On the rear face, a second dial showed the lunar phase with daily precision, waxing, full, waning, new. All of this in a device that fit in 2 hands and weighed less than 2 pounds. To understand the magnitude of that, consider what the rest of the world was doing at that same moment. Rome was expanding its empire with swords. Most civilizations measured time by the sun and moon with the naked eye. And the Greeks had a machine that could tell you where Mars would be in the sky 100 years from now, accurate to the minute. That is not magic. It is mathematics applied at a level that forces us to completely rethink our historical narrative. The island of Rhodes was the intellectual center of the Greek world during that period. And that is where most researchers believe the machine was created. Cicero, the great Roman orator, wrote that he saw in Rhodes a mechanical sphere that reproduced the movements of the heavens. That may have been the same machine, which suggests something deeply unsettling. There may have been more than one. If there were many, where are the others? What happened to that entire body of knowledge? The answer lies in one of the greatest intellectual crimes in history, the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. With the decline of Hellenistic science, books were burned and knowledge accumulated over centuries evaporated within decades. And with them, the blueprints and manufacturing secrets of the most sophisticated machine in the ancient world. The world entered the Middle Ages not knowing that this technology had ever existed, as if it had never been invented, and that fragment of bronze on the ocean floor waited, in perfect silence, for the moment when someone could finally understand it. In 2005, an international consortium of researchers launched the Antikythera Research Project, the most ambitious analysis ever conducted on a single artifact. Using ultra-high-resolution CT scanning, they were able to see inside the fragments without opening them. Inscribed on the inner surfaces of the fragments was an instruction manual in ancient Greek, engraved directly into the bronze. Someone had carved into the machine itself the instructions for using it, as if they knew it would be necessary to explain it to the future. That detail changes everything. It proves the creator was aware of making something extraordinary and impossible to replicate. In 2008, Tony Freeth and his team published the most complete decoding ever achieved. And what they found was even more impressive. They discovered that the mechanism also calculated the Olympic Games and the major Greek religious festivals. The mechanism was simultaneously a civil, political, and religious object, not merely an isolated scientific instrument. Knowing when the next eclipse would occur, before everyone else, was absolute political power over the population. In 2021, new analysis revealed that the front face was even more complex than previously imagined, a complete miniature planetarium. Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, each planet with its own gear and its own individually calculated cycle. Researchers estimate it would take over 2 years of specialized work to build a functional replica using modern tools. 2 years with modern tools. The original craftsmen did it without industrial metallurgy, without microscopes, without computing. In 2022, researchers at the University of Glasgow built a functional replica using only materials and techniques from ancient Greece. And it worked. The pointers turned, the calendar advanced, the planets moved exactly as calculated. A 2,000-year-old machine, reconstructed in the 21st century, functioning exactly as designed by unknown hands. The Antikythera Mechanism is today considered the single most important object in the history of science and technology. More revealing than any weapon or throne, because it proves that human capability does not grow in a straight line. It rises, falls, and begins again. The history we learned in school is a comfortable linear narrative. Primitive, medieval, modern. A smooth evolution. The Antikythera Mechanism proves that narrative is incomplete. The reality is more complex and far more fascinating. Civilizations are not steps on a staircase. They are flowerings. They emerge, flourish, and sometimes vanish without leaving heirs. And when the institutions that sustain knowledge collapse, understanding can disappear for complete millennia. Consider this. Between the Antikythera Mechanism and the first modern computer, exactly 2,000 years passed. 2,000 years of technological gap. A black hole in human progress that no textbook adequately explains. The mechanism survived because it sank. That is the perfect and definitive irony of historical archaeology. Had it reached Rome, it would have been used, perhaps resold, perhaps destroyed by invaders in a burning villa. But the sea protected it. 2,000 years of sediment preserved it better than any vault or human temple ever could. In 2017, the project returned to the site with cutting-edge technology and found new fragments, human bones, and evidence of a larger ship. If the ship was larger than previously thought, so was the cargo. The mechanism may be just one item on a much longer list. And there are documented ancient technologies that history has lost and that have never been recovered. That is certain. Roman concrete has resisted 2,000 years submerged in seawater without disintegrating. The exact formula has still not been fully reproduced. The Antikythera Mechanism is not a historical anomaly. It is the sole survivor of an entire tradition that was destroyed. The mechanism tells us something that goes far beyond astronomy. It tells us about the fragile nature of all human knowledge. About the human need to find patterns in a universe that appears chaotic and indifferent, and about the obsession with leaving something that outlasts the body that created it, with speaking to a future one we'll never know. 2,000 years ago, someone looked at the sky, measured everything with extraordinary precision, and built a machine to preserve that knowledge. That person did not know their name would be forgotten, but they did not care, because the machine would not be. The Antikythera Mechanism is the most concrete proof that we have already been more than we are, and that we can become more than we imagine. The Greek seabed still holds secrets, And that block of bronze in Athens continues to challenge us in silence. Every generation believes that progress is irreversible, that what we have cannot be lost. The Antikythera mechanism proves that belief is dangerous. The mechanism is a warning, not from the past to us, but from ourselves to ourselves, transmitted through time. A warning that knowledge does not preserve itself, that it must be cultivated, passed forward, and protected with intention, and a permanent reminder that humanity has already been more than it is, and can still become everything it has not yet imagined. Human intelligence is not a permanent achievement. It is a fragile project that demands cultivation by every generation. We are a species capable of measuring the cosmos with tools that fit in the palm of a hand, and of forgetting how we did it. The mechanism proves that genius has no preferred era. It emerges when conditions allow and vanishes when they are destroyed. Think about how many other objects like this one sank in other seas and were never found. Archaeology estimates that less than 1% of underwater sites in the Mediterranean have been explored to this day. 99% of the ocean floor remains uninvestigated, and what we have found already changes everything. Every scientific dive in those waters is a bet against forgetting, an attempt to recover what time tried to erase. The Antikythera site has not yet been fully excavated. There are objects there that no human being has seen since the shipwreck. With every diving season, new fragments appear. The sea returns, piece by piece, what it received 2,000 years ago. There are researchers who dedicated entire decades to the mechanism. Some died without seeing the complete decoding. That level of scientific dedication is, in itself, a form of tribute to the unknown craftsman who created it. Two creators separated by 2,000 years, one who built for eternity and one who worked to understand what was built. The mechanism also teaches us something about the nature of progress. It belongs to no nation, no era. It belongs to the species. Greeks, Arabs, medieval Europeans, modern scientists, every civilization contributed a fragment of what we today call science. And the Antikythera mechanism sits at the intersection of all those contributions, an object that belongs to the collective memory of all humanity. When Hipparchus mapped the stars, he did not know he was providing data for a machine someone would build decades later. When Apollonius developed his mathematics of epicycles, he never imagined it would be translated into bronze gears. Knowledge works that way. One generation plants, another harvests, and often no one knows the seed was ever planted. The mechanism is the product of at least 3 centuries of accumulated astronomy, a physical synthesis of generations of observation. Every gear carries within it the work of astronomers who never met each other, separated by decades and sometimes centuries. That is what makes the mechanism truly extraordinary. It is not the product of a solitary genius, but of an entire civilization, functioning in harmony. A civilization where knowledge was valued, accumulated, transmitted, and applied with seriousness and intention. And when that civilization was torn apart by war, conquest, and intolerance, the knowledge went with it, not because it was fragile, but because the institutions that sustained it, the schools, the libraries, the patrons, disappeared. The Antikythera mechanism is the only physical survivor of that world, the only artifact that proves beyond any doubt what had been achieved. Everything else exists only in fragmented descriptions, in second-hand references, in ruins that do not explain what they once supported. But that block of bronze speaks for itself. It needs no interpretation to prove its sophistication. It only needs to exist. And that is why it is unsettling in a way that no temple, ruin, or papyrus fragment can match. Because it is concrete, it has weight, it has gear teeth you can touch, it has inscriptions you can read. It is the most powerful physical evidence ever found that our narrative about the human past is incomplete. Incomplete not out of bad faith, but because history is written with what survives. And what survives is always just a fraction of what existed. Imagine a future civilization trying to reconstruct the 20th century from a single object found on the ocean floor. What would that one object say about us? What would be left out? What would be misunderstood? That is exactly what we do with antiquity. And the mechanism reminds us that our reconstruction is permanently incomplete. But science advances. With every decade, new technologies enable analyses that were previously impossible. What X-rays could not reveal in the 1950s, CT scanning revealed in 2005. What CT scanning could not reach, structured light revealed in 2016. Every new analytical technology is a new conversation with the object, and the object always has more to say. In 2016, researchers used structured light techniques to reveal inscriptions on the outer surfaces that no one had ever read before. Thousands of characters in ancient Greek engraved with microscopic precision, describing the workings of the cosmos as the Greeks understood it. It was like opening a book that had been closed for 2,000 years, and discovering it was written in a language we could still read. Ancient Greek survived, mathematics survived, astronomy survived. Only the object had been lost, and now it was back. That convergence between what survived in written language and what survived in metal is one of the most extraordinary moments in modern archaeology. The mechanism and the text confirm each other, each one filling gaps the other left behind. And together, they paint a portrait of a civilization that understood the cosmos with a depth that forces us to revisit our assumptions about the past. Assumptions that are, at their core, a form of arrogance, the belief that the present is necessarily superior to the past. The Antikythera Mechanism is the perfect antidote to that arrogance. It is the proof in metal that this is simply not true. Not that the Greeks were superior to us, but that they were different from us in ways we still do not fully understand. They had limitations we do not have, and they had capabilities we have lost. And the balance between those two things is more even than we like to admit. Consider this. A Greek from the 2nd century BC, placed in our world, how long would it take him to learn to use a smartphone? And a modern engineer, placed in the workshop of the mechanism's creator, could he replicate the object with the available tools? The honest answer to that second question is, probably not. Not without years of learning the specific techniques of that era. That is what the mechanism tells us about skill. It is deep, specific, and not automatically transferable across time. The craftsman who created the mechanism had decades of experience with bronze, with measuring instruments, with gears, an expertise that took a lifetime to build. And that expertise went to the grave with him, because there was no system robust enough to preserve it beyond his generation. That is the true tragedy of the mechanism. Not only that the object nearly disappeared, but that the knowledge of how to create it certainly did. We can reconstruct the mechanism today, because we have modern physics, mathematics, and engineering. But we do not know how it was originally made. We do not know which specific tools were used. We do not know how long it took. We do not know if there were other craftsmen or if it was a single master. We do not know if the creator was satisfied with the result, if there were aspects he wanted to improve but lacked the time or resources. We do not know if a more advanced version was being planned when history interrupted the knowledge. All of that is lost, and the awareness of that loss is, in itself, a form of knowledge about the fragility of what we are. The mechanism also teaches us about the relationship between technology and society, about how an invention only exists if there is a structure to sustain it. The technology of the mechanism existed, the mathematics existed, the materials existed, but the social structure that sustained it was destroyed. And without the social structure, without the schools, the patrons, the students, the networks of knowledge transmission, the technology disappeared. That is a lesson directly applicable to the present. Technology is not enough. Society is what transforms technology into lasting progress. The institutions that preserve and transmit knowledge are just as important as the knowledge itself, perhaps more so. Alexandria was not just a library. It was a network of people committed to the idea that knowledge must be preserved. When that network was destroyed, whether by fire, by conquest, or by political upheaval, knowledge lost its anchor. And that was the true collapse. Not the burning of papyrus scrolls, but the end of the community that knew how to use them. The mechanism survived because it was on the ocean floor, but the knowledge of how to create it died with the last people who possessed it. That is the paradox of the Antikythera Mechanism. The object survived, but the context that gave it full meaning was lost. We are, even today, trying to reconstruct that context, trying to understand not just what the mechanism did, but the world that made it necessary. A world where predicting an eclipse was a matter of political survival, where the calendar was sacred, where the sky was both God and scientific data. A world radically different from ours, and at the same time recognizable, because the human beings who inhabited it had the same fears, the same ambitions, and the same curiosity we have. The mechanism is the bridge between that world and ours, an object that existed there and arrived here, crossing 2,000 years and 2,000 meters of depth. And when we look at it in its display case at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, we are looking at something that belongs equally to the past and to the future. Because what the mechanism represents, the translation of cosmic knowledge into a physical and usable object, is exactly what we do today with computers, telescopes, and satellites. The difference is one of scale and material. The impulse is identical: to understand where we are in the universe and to use that understanding for something practical. In that sense, the creator of the mechanism and the engineers of the James Webb Space Telescope are doing the same thing, separated by 2,000 years and united by the same fundamental human impulse. The impulse to look at the sky and ask, what is this? How does it work? And how can I use this knowledge? That impulse is what defines us as a species. Not language, not culture, not religion, but curiosity directed at the cosmos. The Antikythera Mechanism is the oldest and most extraordinary physical expression of that impulse that has survived to reach us. And that is why it matters. Not merely as an archaeological artifact, but as a mirror, as a reflection of what we are at the deepest level. When the mechanism was pulled from the sea in 1901, it was in pieces. Fragmented, corroded, almost unrecognizable. And it remained that way for decades, broken apart in its museum box, waiting for someone who would know what they were looking at. That is a metaphor for human knowledge in general. It is often right in front of us in pieces, waiting for someone who can see the pattern. The ability to see patterns where others see chaos. That is the essence of science, of art, and of every form of human creation. Archaeologist Staius saw gears where others saw corroded bronze. Price saw a computer where others saw a mysterious instrument. Each generation of researchers saw something new in the same object, because each generation brought new tools and new questions. And that will continue. The coming decades will certainly bring new revelations about the mechanism, new functions, new inscriptions, new connections. Because objects like this one do not run dry. They grow in meaning as humanity grows in its capacity for understanding. The Antikythera Mechanism in 1902 was a mystery. In 1974, it was an analog computer. In 2008, it was a planetarium. In 2021, it was a complete cosmos in miniature. And in 2050, or in 2100, it will be something we do not yet have the vocabulary to describe, because our understanding has not gotten there yet. That is extraordinary. A 2,000-year-old object that still grows in meaning, that still has more to teach than it has already taught. Most ancient objects tell us what humanity did. The Antikythera Mechanism tells us what humanity is capable of doing. And that distinction is everything, because what humanity is capable of doing has no fixed limit, as the mechanism itself proves. When you leave here knowing what you now know about the mechanism, you carry a fragment of that truth with you. The truth that history is not a straight line, that progress is not guaranteed, that knowledge can be lost, but also the truth that human curiosity is unstoppable, that it always finds a way to emerge, to create, to question, that in some Mediterranean port 2,000 years ago, someone looked at the sky and decided that the beauty of that cosmos deserved to be captured in metal. And that gesture, that act of translating the infinite into something that fit in two hands, was so powerful that it crossed 2 millennia and still makes us stop. Still makes us look at that corroded bronze fragment and feel with absolute clarity that the distance between us and its creator is smaller than time suggests. Because the impulse that drove that person is the same one that drives every scientist, every engineer, every artist who tries to capture reality in a form that others can hold. The Antikythera Mechanism is not just history, it is a mirror. And what it reflects is the best version of what we are. A species that looks at the chaos of the universe and insists, generation after generation, on finding the order hidden within it. A species that builds machines to preserve what it has learned, because it knows that human memory is fragile and the cosmos is permanent. A species that sinks into forgetting and resurfaces, like that bronze fragment rising from the ocean floor after 2,000 years. It always resurfaces, with new tools, new questions, and the same ancient impulse to understand where we are and why. The ocean floor still holds secrets. History still has gaps we do not know how to fill. The mechanism still has unsolved mysteries. And that is good news, because it means there is more to discover, that the conversation between the present and the past is not yet finished, that the anonymous craftsman from Rhodes, or wherever he came from, still has things to tell us. We only need the patience to listen, the humility to admit we do not know everything, and the curiosity to keep asking. Those three things, patience, humility, and curiosity, are what the Antikythera Mechanism asks of us in return for everything it offers. It is a small price for the greatest lesson any object has ever taught humanity about itself.